There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Genesis. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. And Sarah, she loves Abraham. She doesn't want to hold him back from having children. And she knows the problem. She's the problem. And so she comes up with this plan, and she's going to help God out with this plan. And so she's going to give Abraham Hagar, her Egyptian maid. She's going to give Hagar to Abraham for a wife. Now, this is nothing Abraham has ever wanted. All he ever wanted was Sarah. He loved Sarah. And everyone knew that Sarah was very, very beautiful. Because you remember, like just last week, we talked about how young she probably looked, that she probably looked like she was in her 20s, like Rebecca. And Abraham, he had almost lost her because of her beauty to the Pharaoh of Egypt. So Abraham, I don't think he had any desire to take Hagar as a wife. And you would think with that name Hagar, that she wouldn't be very pretty. You'd think, oh, she's such a Hagar. And the only Hagar that I had ever heard about was Hagar the Horrible, who was this comic strip, and it was a Viking guy, and he had a mustache, and that's the only Hagar I've ever heard about. Nobody ever names their kids Hagar, but it's probably not true. The truth is, she probably was very beautiful. Because you would think that probably, since it was Sarah's maid and she was an Egyptian, that she may have been given to Sarah by Pharaoh himself. And if that was true, she would have to be beautiful to be able to work within the presence of Pharaoh. And even if that's not true, Abraham and Sarah, they had a lot of servants that they could have picked from. Because we saw last week they had 318 men just to go to war. And you have to remember that this Hagar, she's not going to be able to keep this child for herself. She's only being used by Sarah as a surrogate. She's going to bear this child for Sarah. This is going to become Sarah's child. And this was a very common practice in that culture, because we'll even see this later on with Jacob, Abraham's grandson, that Jacob's wives, they give both their maids, Rachel and Leah, they give their maids to Jacob so that they could have more children for themselves in their competition to win their husband's affection. And so I'm sure that Sarah picked the most beautiful, the most young, healthy woman available, because this child's going to represent Sarah. This was going to be Sarah's child. And so she needed to be beautiful. She didn't pick the good old sturdy Helga, the German Hofrau who could lift a cow with one arm. She picked Hagar, the Egyptian beauty. And you see that Sarah, she begged Abraham. And she's saying, please, because I don't think Abraham wanted any part of this plan, because he didn't ever hear God mention anything about Hagar. But you see, Sarah, she's desperate. They've been in the land for 10 years. God made that first promise of the dust of the earth over 10 years ago. And in Sarah's mind, if God was going to bring this about by her, it would have happened by now. But you have to realize, Sarah, she's not really seeking God's plan to bring the Christ into the world. She just wants to have a baby. And so Abraham, he finally gives in to Sarah. I don't think she just asked him once. I think she kept asking him over and over and over. And there is a time when a husband should not listen to his wife. And one of them is when she wants to have a baby, wants him to have a baby with another woman. The other is when she wants him to get a dog. So Abraham, he takes Hagar as a wife, and she conceives, and she's pregnant. It worked. Everybody should be happy. But you see, things never turn out happy when we take God's plans and we take them into our own hands and we make them work out our own way. And this isn't working out, just like Egypt didn't work out. So now Hagar's pregnant. And now Sarah, she's not only wondering if she was a problem, now she knows that she's the problem. It wasn't Abraham, that she's the one that couldn't conceive a child. And now we have this poor Egyptian slave girl. Now she's just been elevated to the position of the woman carrying Abraham's child. And you have to remember, Abraham, he's the most powerful, influential man in the whole area. And now she's carrying his baby. And Hagar, well, now she hates Sarah. And she can give Abraham something that Sarah couldn't. And so Hagar, she despises her mistress. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but maybe that means she wouldn't do what Sarah told her to do anymore. And she made herself probably more important in her own eyes. And maybe it would be something like Sarah would say something like, Hagar, take out the trash. I don't think Abraham would want me to take out the trash with his baby. I don't know. And so Sarah does what any wife would do in this situation. She blames her husband, though this would not happen in my home. But Sarah's defense here is, you should never listen to me. It's your fault. And so this Hagar that was given to Abraham for a wife, Abraham gives her back to Sarah as a maid. And so Sarah receives Hagar back, and she's mean, and she's harsh, and she's going to get even. And she has a grudge against Hagar. And so she abuses her. But now you have to remember, Hagar, she's pregnant, and she has no support. She's stuck. And when Abraham gave her back to Sarah, that tells her that she's on her own. And you have to realize that none of this is her fault. None of it was her choice. She's just being used by other people for their purposes. And so she runs. And when she runs, nobody's chasing her. And now she's this runaway slave, and she's carrying her master's child, and she's probably trying to get back home to Egypt. But she doesn't have a camel, and she doesn't have a donkey. And so she's walking through the wilderness, and she stops at this spring of water. And though nobody's looking for Hagar, the angel of the Lord was looking for her, and he shows up at that spring. Now, this is the very first appearance of the angel of the Lord in the scriptures. And the angel of the Lord is no one other than the pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ himself. Last week, we wondered if Melchizedek may have been a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. And pre-incarnate, if you remember, that means like carne asada, with flesh, right? With meat. We know here that when it says the angel of the Lord and not just a angel of the Lord, that the word the is called a definite article, and it's speaking of a specific person. And we know that this is talking about Jesus. The word angel, all that means is messenger, but the messenger of the Lord is always identified as God himself. And we see this name, the angel of the Lord, show up later with Abraham. We see it with Jacob. We see it with Samson's parents. And we even see it with King David and Elijah. And it's always been Jesus. And they always identify it when they do see him as seeing God, of seeing God himself face to face. And the angel, every time you read about him, he never denies being God. And we always see him, he does receive worship and he receives offerings. And this is because that the angel of the Lord in Jesus, he's always existed because he is the eternal Son of God. And that's before he was ever born as Jesus in the land of Bethlehem. And so the first person the angel of the Lord shows himself to ever is a woman. It's a foreign woman. She's an Egyptian. And she's also a slave. And that's because God is no respecter of persons. And you have to see Hagar here, she wasn't looking for God. She was an Egyptian. She probably worshiped many gods. But the angel of the Lord, he sought her and he found her on the way to Egypt. And that's because God loves her and he has plans for her. And he also has plans for her child. Because the angel of the Lord, he wasn't like Abraham and Sarah. He wasn't just using the poor girl. He loves her too. And even though she was deserted by Abraham and Sarah, he doesn't desert her. But he also doesn't call her Hagar, Abraham's wife. He doesn't acknowledge that marriage. And he calls her Hagar, Sarah's maid. And he doesn't come and he doesn't command her. And he doesn't come and yell at her. He comes the way that he always comes. He comes and he asks her two questions, gently, very calmly. And you have to remember, when God asks questions, he already knows the answers. He's asking these questions for Hagar's sake. And he says, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from? Where are you going? And Hagar, she told him where she came from, that she's fleeing from Sarah, but she doesn't know where she's going. She doesn't realize that she has nowhere to go. But after that question, she realized that. And so the angel of the Lord, he tells her how to return. He goes, return submitted to Sarah. You just need to change your attitude. And then he makes her these promises. And these promises are just like the promises that he made to Abraham. And he starts it by saying, I will multiply your descendants, and they won't be able to be counted either. And that's because they're also going to be Abraham's children. And he tells her that you're going to have a son. And then the angel of the Lord, he names the son, and he calls that son God will hear, which is Ishmael. And if you ever notice, God likes naming people. He names Ishmael. He ends up naming Isaac. He renames Abram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah. He likes naming people. And then God tells Hagar about her son's nature. He says he's going to be a wild man. And I don't think that's really what you want to hear about having a son, that you're going to have a son. He's going to be a wild man. But it was true. It came true. Because Ishmael, he became the father of all the Arabs. And he said they would fight, he would be among his brothers. And they do. They fight against Christians and they fight against Jews, but they fight just as much among themselves.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.